Now we are going to talk about the use of antidepressants in children and adolescents. And this has been a very controversial subject for years and years and years. This is all as I am, I guess. And I have to tell you that it has evolved in a very peculiar manner, which I already mentioned to you. In spite of the evidence, we are medicating children with antidepressants right, left, and center, but you will see the reasons why this is happening at the moment, when in fact it may not be appropriate. As you know, they have exploded now in a kind of a scandal that we will cover briefly. I'm not after the scandal, I'm after facts and information that may be useful to all of us, and clarifying the complexity of the issues, and perhaps give you a little of the history so that you know how we got to be where we are now, and how we are in this incredible situation, which, in spite of the available evidence, is completely ignored, and these medications are given right, left, and center. Now, that doesn't mean to say that there is not a place for these medications. There is. Not in children, though. Okay, let's move on. This is what brought this to a head. Though there have been argument about these problems, as I told you, for innumerable years. But as you see, last year, at the end of the year, in December, in the United Kingdom, is this in your way? Medicines and healthcare products. The United Kingdom Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency banned all of the SSRIs except Prozac. Prozac, incidentally, in England is the only drug that has been approved for children. No, in the past. It banned all the SSRIs, which are serotonin reuptake inhibitors, except Prozac for those under 18, citing poor evidence of efficacy and a raised risk of self-harm and suicidal thoughts. This was done after hearing the conclusions of an expert panel they set up to review the safety and efficacy of SSRIs in people under 18 years of age. That's what started to create the problem. That, as you see, is a dramatic event, right? Now, in this country, our Federal Drug Administration had a public health advisory on March 22nd of this year about the possible worsening of depression and suicidality in patients being treated with antidepressant medication. And at that point, it asked the manufacturers of these antidepressants, which are listed below, to include in their label an important warning statement. It recommends the close observation of adult and pediatric patients treated with these agents for the emergency of agitation, irritability, insomnia, and other symptoms, including the worsening of depression or the emergency of suicidality. And you see the list there. It's essentially all the antidepressants that are nowadays available. These are, all of them are serotonin reuptake inhibitors, but the same applies to tricyclic, only the worse, because tricyclics are a little more dangerous than serotonin reuptake inhibitors. In this sense, tricyclic, an overdose of tricyclic will kill you. An overdose of serotonin reuptake inhibitors might not kill you. So it's a big difference, particularly when you are using these drugs with people that are depressed and are at some risk of suicide. Now, let's talk about depression in young children, that is before puberty. There have been a lot of people, in fact 30, 40 years ago, nobody believed that there was such a thing as depressive illness in children before puberty. Children before that age did not seem to have the adult equivalent of a severe depression illness. Now, that doesn't mean to say that children don't get depressed. Children get very depressed. Everybody gets depressed, every one of us. gets depressed once in a while for one reason or another, because certain events produce an affective reaction of depression. It makes you sad, whatever it may be. A large number of things can depress you a little bit. That doesn't mean to say that you are sick and need medication. It just means that you are a normal human being reacting with the appropriate affective, response to an event to which this response is appropriate. We talk about depression, but think about crying. Crying is a normal response. We cry in relation to certain events. Again, that may sadden us and make us feel bad about something or another. And if you cry as a reaction to something that legitimately can produce tears in any human being, you are not abnormal. You are not depressed, you don't need medication, you don't need ECT. You are just having a normal human reaction to a certain event, right? Now, that's a normal affective response. If, on the other hand, you are crying all day long for no reason whatsoever, you just cry, you don't know why, there is no reason in your life why you should be crying. That's different. That's crying as a result of an illness. Because normal human beings don't cry for no reason at all. They have to have a good reason, and the reason must be appropriate to the response. You understand what I mean? So if you think about crying as an alternative to depression, you see the difference between the normal affective response to a certain event and the illness type of phenomena, which are two completely different things. Now, personally, I have been a psychiatrist for many, many years. As you know, I have been an analyst for nearly as many years. I have never seen a genuine depression in a child. I have seen a lot of children very depressed. I have children that talk about killing themselves, and talk about committing suicide and things of that kind. But is that really the equivalent of an adult severe depression, which I will describe to you in a little moment, in a little while? Not really. It's mostly a reactive phenomena. And just as they get depressed very quickly, at the drop of a hat, at the drop of the next hat, they are out of it, running around happy, laughing and playing and the rest of it. That's not an illness, Children have more difficulty in modulating their responses than adults do, and so their responses may be kind of a caricature and more severe than those of adults that we have more resources to control certain responses to certain events and so on. The same is true, I am sorry to say, of so-called manic depressive illness or bipolar disorder in children. As you know, I work in the department of psychiatry, in the outpatient department, see a large number of patients, and I can tell you how large the number is of children that I see with the diagnosis of bipolar disorder that are medicated accordingly. Now, the medications that I use for bipolar disorder, mood stabilizers, are big guns and can have dramatic side effects, including life-threatening side effects, For example, Depakote in young children is known to damage the liver to such a degree that you won't recover, you will die. And in this town, I know of several such cases where that has happened. Not to us at the university, we don't touch the stuff in children, young children, but other people does. And, you get to hear of these things. I quite frankly have never seen a child which I could honestly say he has a manic depressive illness, with two exceptions. Two little girls, both 8 years of age. One of them, you may remember her, came from England with this. It was like an adult manic depressive episode, over sex, quite inappropriate, quite manic, quite very dramatic, shocking. The other one I have seen in a number, similar situation. You will say, well, then it does exist. Yeah, but both these girls have precocious puberty. They started to menstruate at 7 or 8 years of age, and shortly after that happened, they became manic depressive. All right? Outside of these two cases, which were precocious puberty, I have never seen a manic depressive child. I really haven't. I have seen child that behave in ways that people will say, oh, isn't that manic depression? I will say, no, it is not. It's like a toy gun. I mean, yeah, it looks like a gun, it makes noise like a gun, but it doesn't fire bullets like a gun. It's not a real gun. You understand what I mean? And this is the same situation. So for a long time, that was not the case. Then suddenly, and this happened essentially after medications appear to treat depression. The first one that appears were the tricyclic antidepressants. No sooner did that happen that the extrapolation of adults to children was made in psychiatry on no basis whatsoever, and these medications were started to be used, and tricyclic antidepressants were used in children. They, as antidepressant medication, in certain type of patients, late adolescent patients and adult patients, can be very effective if you have the right kind of diagnosis, and we will get into that in a moment. Otherwise, they are dangerous medications. I told you a moment ago that an overdose of tricyclics will kill you, and not even God will be able to save you. While overdoses of serotonin reuptake inhibitors don't tend to do that, and that's why they very quickly, once the serotonin reuptake inhibitors came into the picture, they very quickly displaced the tricyclic drugs. But the same phenomenon took place. The extrapolation from adult to children, and children started to receive serotonin reuptake inhibitors because they were depressed. And the field started to get flooded with literature of depression in children. Now, it became untenable. It died by its own weight. There were different things, and it was clearly not possible to demonstrate that children suffer from the type of adult depression that is a severe illness. And we will discuss that in a moment, as I told you. So what they say is, well, you can see that because children don't have those symptoms. They have what is called depression equivalents. And they start to produce a list of depression equivalents that grow to be so big that this building could not contain it. In other words, everything under the sky became a depression equivalent. Well, as you will imagine, after a little while, a few years though, of strong arguments one way or another, yes there is, yes, you are a dinosaur, you don't want to move with the times, there is such an illness. People say, no, there is not. After many years, it fell by its own weight. It became so absurd that everything could be a depressive equivalent that it lost meaning. And so it was abandoned. And few people now present any logical data or research control studies that demonstrate that there is such a disorder. As you see from the book that I circulated among you, of people that reviews the whole literature all over the world, they will say, after all of this, all you can say is that placebos are just as good as antidepressants in children, which means antidepressants have no value in children, and antidepressants are big guns. Placebo usually is a neutral substance covered maybe with sugar or something, so they can do you not much harm. Antidepressants can. Tricyclic antidepressants, for example, in children, have been blamed for sudden death, cardiac death. The link is not that clearly established again, but it's possible because, and that's what kills in an overdose of tricyclic antidepressant, the conduction time in the heart gets enormously increased, so it essentially stops the heart. All right? And so somebody who takes an overdose will die for that reason. So they are very dangerous, obviously. Well, that fell by the board, but in an insidious manner. As more and more antidepressants were produced by the pharmaceutical companies, more and more there was some kind of, at the beginning, difficult to point out, subtle pressures to use medications. Remember, pharmaceutical companies are business, and they are in the business of selling drugs. The more drugs they sell, the more money they make, the better the bottom line. All right? And I will show you the figures so that you understand the kind of monies that are involved in these things and why some pharmaceutical companies have behaved in what are very unscrupulous manner. Not all, by any means. So, little bit by little bit, that started to develop. So that's how we got where we are. Now they are being used. I tell you a little more about it. Let me say at the same time that children before the age of 11 or 12 don't understand the concept of death. So when a 7-year or 8-year-old child tells you, I'm going to kill myself, I want to die, he doesn't know what the hell he's saying. You know, he doesn't understand the concept of death, the finality of the concept of death like you and I understand it. He doesn't understand that. And I have discussed here that in the past, and if you go to the web page and you want to look at suicide in children and adolescents, we have a lecture there that give all kind of data about the numbers that commit suicide, the reason why they commit suicide, how they commit suicide, and all of that. So it's very easy to find the information. It's already in the web page. We have talked about it. But they don't understand really what they are saying. And even those that attempt to kill themselves, as we will describe it, and may even be successful, they really don't understand what they have done. They don't understand what death is. And even in adolescence, as you know, that's a peculiar kind of situation that we will describe as well. I have an alternative theory, which I don't know whether it is true or not, but it's possible. You see, I don't think that you see either what used to be called endogenous depression, which is a severe depressive illness that runs in families and is genetically determined and goes from one generation to the next and kills a lot of people, all right? And does require treatment and is really an emergency, a serious psychiatric emergency. I don't think that happens before puberty. Just as bipolar disorder doesn't happen in children before puberty. Once you get to be puber, whether that is at 12, 13, 14, or 15, these things start to become evident. In other words, you see in these puber kids now the same illness that you see in the adult, exactly the same manifestation, and they respond to medications in an appropriate manner if you are using the right medication, all right? So my alternative theory is that genes are very interesting kind of things. And some of them don't become active for many years. Something triggers the switch off and then they become active and the necessary consequences of that activation become visible in the form of illness. Some destructive muscular paralysis that end by killing people start somewhat later in life. My thought is, I don't know whether this is true or not, but is it possible? And some people have thought of this as well. And on occasion talk about this theory. Is it possible that there is something up to the point of puberty that protects people that are carriers of the gene and at puberty will become sick with these disorders from developing it in the earlier years of their life? And people say, what could that be? Well, one thing is clear, it's after puberty. Does the development of the sexual glands and the hormonal turmoil that takes place at that point has something to do with it? Nobody knows. Conceivable. Another theory that once in a while have been thrown around, and I always have looked at it with some interest, is that there are certain glands in our body that becomes non-functional at around puberty. The thymus, which is an enormously important gland, had a lot to do with the development of the immunological system in human beings and in the marking cells to produce certain types of immunological response, T cells and any number of cells. All of it is done by the thymus. The thymus disappears around puberty. Could there be something there that is protecting these children from it? Well, if any of this were true, whatever that will be, assuming that it is true, and it may not be, wouldn't that be the best treatment possible for depression? If it's capable of stopping it until puberty, whatever that is, if we knew what it is that trigger is off, or we knew what protects the switch from going off and becoming active early on, that may be an important thing to look at. Unfortunately, it's not really being looked at very much. Of course, there is a possibility, as I told you, that with some other genes, they, for God knows what reasons, they are not clear to us nowadays, only become active at a certain point in life, and that may be as late as 40, 50 years. Even think of Alzheimer's disease. That may be in the 60s and 70s. And carriers of certain genes are certainly more predisposed to the development of that illness than others are. So that's an alternative way of looking at the problem, which is certainly interesting. Now, let's briefly discuss the diagnostic statistic manuals that we use in psychiatry. Very briefly. At the beginning, not at the beginning, before DSM-3, if you look at the statistic manual and you look at any textbook in psychiatry, and I am old enough to have seen all of this, these have gone in front of my eyes through the years. I have seen all of it. I was a psychiatrist when there were no medications, none, zero, zilch, nil, for depression. There was nothing except ECT. The same was true for schizophrenia. Incidentally, ECT was a wonderful form of treatment and still is probably the best form of treatment there is. Though it has full disrepute, I will tell you why too in another little while. So I have seen all of these changes to take place at the beginning. If you look at the book of psychiatry, we will divide depressions into two groups: endogenous depression and reactive depression. They were called reactive emotional depression. The type that I told you, that was triggered off by an environmental cause and grew to be big, was not the normal affective response to a negative event that makes you depressed. It went a little past that, and you linger on it, and you maybe had suicidal thoughts and so on, that generally speaking, when you are negatively affected by something, you may get depressed, but you may not go that far. The There was always an event in the outside world that triggered off the phenomenon. You could always find it. In contrast, the endogenous depression, which is the thing that I told you, came out of the blue. It may have been at the best time in the life of this individual, and suddenly, poof, he crashed and was depressed like you wouldn't believe. And felt like a dog, and usually was full of self-accusations. These people will come to you and say, "Dog, I'm a bad person. Somebody should kill me. I shouldn't be alive. I'm terrible." And you say, "Why? What do you do?" Nothing. It's a feeling of being terrible, of being a bad person. Self-accusations were quite common. There were a lot of neurovegetative systems. These people had all kinds of problems. For example, they lost their sexual function completely. They lost their appetite. They didn't eat. It was not uncommon that they have lost 10, 15 pounds in the last 2-3 weeks, you know. They were constipated. It had certain specific characteristics to it. The worst time was the morning. They couldn't get up. They couldn't get out of bed. As the day went by, the affective tone improved, and though they never got really feeling well, they were still very depressed. They will tell you, "Oh, the worst time is the morning. In the evening, I feel a little better. It's not as bad. It's still bad, but not as bad." None of that was true of the reactive depression. Not at all. In those days, in the endogenous depression, you would not have seen a patient that will fit the present description, where one of the symptoms of depression is overeating. Nowadays, depression may be characterized in the new definitions that we will get into in a moment as something that may produce either anorexia or overeating. That never happened in endogenous depression. They didn't eat. They never had sexual appetite. They lost their sexual appetite. They were not interested in sex at all. You know? Further, they didn't bath. They didn't shave. They didn't, clean the teeth. They didn't give a hoot about how they look, what their appearance was like, what clothing they were wearing, and things of that kind. None of that was true of the reactive depression. They kept taking baths frequently. They did not have, more commonly than not, they may have a little less sexual interest because they were a little down on the mouse, but they didn't lose the function. They could do it. Really endogenous depression was out of it. It was out of the picture. So as you see, there were enormous differences, and these were the two distinct groups. One had a distinct cause that you can always find. You just ask, what happened? And they will tell you. And, it was appropriate. There was some appropriateness. Now, the degree of the response may have been excessive in some of these people, to the point that they will become suicidal and on occasion kill themselves. But as you will see, one kills oneself for many reasons outside depression, But that was very rare. The other thing that was very typical, the moment you start to talk to them, you could establish a relationship with them. They interacted with you, and you could feel that you could keep them safe just by seeing them frequently and talking to them and discussing the events that had led to that and so on. You had an endogenous depression, and you could go blue in the face talking to them. You couldn't click with them at all. They didn't believe you. And though you told him, look, I'm a physician. I have treatments that can make you better. Those days was ECT. It makes you better. It makes you well very quickly. In 3 weeks, you were well. Depressing drugs take 3 to 6 weeks to see some improvement. In those days, 3-4 weeks, you were new. The depression was gone until the next time. Because these things are cyclical. The endogenous depression were cyclical. They came back in a cycle every 2 years, every 10 years, every 20 years. But they came like clockwork to the point that when I was a psychiatrist in my country practice, in my files, we had red flags with the next time of the episode for each patient. And when 2 years later, you know, those that had a cycle of 2 years, my secretary would say, you know, Dr. Nagera, so-and-so is flagged about this time. We will call the families and say, how is he doing? Typically, I would say, he's not doing well. We were thinking of taking him to you. That was endogenous depression, not the reactive depression. The reactive depression is a reaction to an external event which doesn't come cyclically. You understand what I mean? So, as you see the enormous difference. Then, when the drugs appear, and it started with the tricyclic antidepressant, tofranil, imipramine, desipramine, all of these, you know, and a number of them. The pharmaceutical companies got into this act, you know, and as you will see, they have an enormous influence in what happened afterwards. In any case, through a number of different influences, those that were in charge of developing these diagnostic and statistic manuals lumped together the endogenous depression and the reactive depression and called them major depressive disorder. And then develop a number of other dysthymia for certain types of minimal dysphoric feelings and so on. But what they have done is mix apple and oranges. Okay? Apples responded to ECT. Oranges, the reactive depression, did not. You give them ECT, they were worse because it did not improve the mood, it did not change the external event, which was the cause of the depression, and it made them very confused. There is a little loss of memory for the 2 or 3 weeks of the treatment. You get a little confused for 2 or 3 weeks and then it goes away. So these people didn't benefit. Unfortunately, as you will see, that I think have created a disaster, an absolute disaster, and I will describe it to you as we develop the arguments. Now, depression, as I told you a moment ago, is a normal affect. And everybody suffers from it. Everybody that is a human being just like joy is a normal affect, and crying is a normal affect, you know, depression is a normal affect. Yeah? Now, there are certain forms of joy that are not normal. Your joy is excessive and there is no reason for you being that joyful. You may be manic. That's different. But if you have good reason, you have good news, something good happened in your family, you won the lottery, whatever it is, sure you will be, jumping for joy. That is not an illness. That's a normal reaction, right? The same is true of any number of other affects. Now, depression as an illness is like all of these other affects as an illness. Now, in those days, and in these days, what was then called reactive depressions were a heck of a lot more common than endogenous depression. Reactive depressions were very common. It's part of life, for God's sake. Everybody has something going in their life at some time or another that will be hard on them and will make feel a little down and a little depressed. Remember, the endogenous depression came out of the blue. It did not need, and it did never have, an external event as a triggering off mechanism. In fact, it tended to happen very frequently when things were going wonderfully. And people say, how is that possible? Life is wonderful. His business is growing at an incredible speed. We have become millionaires. He thinks we're going to be ruined and going to the house of the poor next week. We have millions of dollars. You know what I mean? typical of endogenous depression, never of a reactive depression. Enormous difference. They were mixed together. They were mixed together. Once they mix together, the medications are given to anybody who gets the diagnosis of major depressive disorder, which includes a lot of reactive depression that really don't do well with medication, except as a placebo. Again, I will show you that. And those patients, legitimate endogenous disorders, where the medications might be useful in many such cases. So in a way, the pharmaceutical companies have shot themselves in the foot by being greedy and trying to extend this, where it doesn't belong. All right. So we have the issue of depression as an illness in children, and I am asking here, is it real? Doesn't exist, or is not yet clear? I can tell you that all the controlled research studies available demonstrate that antidepressants have absolutely no value in children and early adolescents. I told you most of this. The symptoms of the endogenous depressions. Another thing that I didn't mention and should is that the thoughts were very slow. They thought slowly. They couldn't think at the speed that they were used to think. In fact, if you told them, "Have you thought like molasses?" They say, "Oh yeah, I can move them. It's terrible." That never happened in a reactive depression. Never. They could think at the same speed that they always thought. But these people with the endogenous, their movements were slow, and they were bad. You never saw that in a reactive depression. That was very, very rare in a reactive depression. We had an adolescent here in the unit, I don't know if Francis remember her, which was very depressed. We had to hospitalize her. She was post-puber. And the family thought that, well, she did the usual thing. She stopped doing all the things that she used to do. She was a very active girl in sports, basketball, and a variety of track things and so on. And she had abandoned all of that, and he wasn't going out. She was a very, buoyant kind of girl, very social and so on. All of that had disappeared. So I remember talking to her in front of a group of people. And she was an adolescent. She was slow now. She didn't think she was depressed. And I said, "But don't you feel that you are different now?" I said, "Look, you walk slowly. To get an answer from you takes some time. It's obviously for you to be difficult to produce an answer. Don't you think you're different? You are not playing basketball. You are not doing any of these things." I said, no, it's not me. The world is moving faster. That was a perception. Not that she had a slowdown, but that the world was moving faster. Interesting. But adolescents are somewhat peculiar, But she certainly had an endogenous depression. It ran in the family. You could find it. That's the other thing. Never diagnose an endogenous, a severe form of depression if it doesn't run in the family. Now, occasionally, you may not know the family history, and then that's an unknown. But if the family history is unknown, and these illnesses are not there, neither bipolar disorder nor severe depressive episode grows in trees. There are genetic disorders, they run in families. And you must be able to have that diagnosis. Hopelessness and helplessness is very severe in the endogenous depression, and it was an indication of the seriousness of the imminence of the suicide. The more hopeless and the more helplessness that they felt, the more serious you thought the situation was. That was extraordinarily rare in the reactive depression. In fact, as soon as you talk to them, you could get their spirits up. You could never do that with an endogenous depression. Okay, that more or less gives you a feeling for that. Now, depressions tend to come back in over 50% of depressed patients. And of course, that's more likely to happen in the endogenous depression because, as I told you, they have a timetable. They are periodical illness. They come every so many years, they come back. It doesn't matter what you do, they will come back. In fact, you treated them, you got them well in a month, let's say, with CCT, and 6 years later, if that was the period of the cycle, they will be there again. They will come out of it again perfectly till the next 6 years. All right? Incomplete. Now, in the present day situation with drugs, incomplete remission of depression, that is partial remission, happens in over 40% of the patients that are treated with antidepressant. It doesn't matter what antidepressant is. In other words, they don't really get well. They may get a little better, but not well. Okay? So then generally, what do you do? Well, we do all kinds of things without taking into account that maybe we are barking at the wrong tree. What we do is we increase the doses, for example. He's not taking enough. We double the doses or triple the doses. We change the antidepressant and say, well, this one doesn't suit him, the other one might. Second antidepressant may be added, a mood stabilizer may be added. You check the thyroid and other medical conditions, which you always should do in any case, because many medical conditions lead to depression, as you heard the other evening here, Dr. Fernandez, the chairman of the department, described. Medications frequently produce depression, all right? It's not suicidal depressions, generally speaking, but the depressive affect, a depressive mood, antidepressant, a variety of antihypertensive medication, and so on. Otherwise, what we do, when everything fails, we try something called monoamine oxidase inhibitors, which are very dangerous because they are incompatible with a large number of the things that human beings eat, including cheese and certain type of meat and wine and all kind of chocolate, all kind of things. So, and you can have a hypertensive crisis as a result of it that will kill you. So, most people don't touch them, all right, for that reason. Or, when everything else fails and the thing is very dramatic, you go to ECT. And ECT, if you have the right diagnosis, and that is an endogenous depression, will make these people well. We used to, in the hospital, when we had the psychiatric hospital here, have a lot of puerperal depression. That's not an uncommon phenomenon. It happens after birth to certain women that have a predisposition to it. Runs in families. And with each delivery, the situation becomes much worse. And we have one there that couldn't look after the baby, couldn't look after anybody. The husband was at his wits' ends. The parents, though, were against it. She had been in all kind of treatment. She had been depressed for a long time and didn't get better with anything, but the parents will object to it. So we had to take her to court. I took her to court and I said, this is wrong. This woman needs ECT and she will get well in a matter of 2 or 3 weeks, and this is criminal, Your Honor. And the judge said, given that everything else had failed and the husband was for it, dismissed the family. We gave her ECT, took 3 weeks. She went home, happy with a baby, became a mother, became a wife, became a human being, for God's sake. She was so miserable, so depressed, because these people suffer in ways that I cannot describe to you. I mean, having an endogenous depression is about one of the worst things that can happen to a human being when it is severe. Yeah. That's why they commit suicide. With an inordinate frequency, about 10-15% of them will kill themselves, you know. So, let's talk about the role of the pharmaceutical companies. We are on page 10 there. Pharmaceutical companies had nothing to do with CCT. At the beginning, there were no form of treatment. They had nothing to say about it. Once some antidepressant drugs were discovered, which were serendipitous discoveries, incidentally, like most discoveries in psychiatry, they have accidents. It's like, I don't know, to give you an example with Stratera. Stratera started its life as an antidepressant. It was a bad antidepressant, but in the course of trying it with depressed people, they found that some people with ADHD improved, so they changed it very quickly. That was a serendipitous phenomenon, you know. And most things in psychiatry, unfortunately, up to this point, have been of that type. Once that happened, of course, pharmaceutical companies got very interested in selling medications, all right? And they started to influence the field. Indeed, they have influenced the field to a degree that, and it's in every branch of medicine, I have to say with some sadness, because we doctors have some responsibility for this. Originally, the pharmaceutical companies did their own research. They have their own research organizations, and you know. Now they change. They decided to go into universities and use faculties in universities to do their research, and they finance them. They give large amounts of money for this research. You see, 1,000 patients, they give you whatever, $5,000 for every patient that you see. That's a lot of money, you know. And of course, a lot of people go for that kind of money. What led to that? Many things. It's really a combination of factors. You see, the help from the federal government and the state governments that used to go to medical schools to teach medical students and to train, you know, people in specialties and so on, dry out completely. So the medical schools and the different departments had to become entrepreneurial. Well, this was a source of incredible income, you know. What I do here would have been impossible in those days. This center buys some hardware from the university for me to run it. 30 years ago, they would say, what? Are you crazy? You are full-time here at the university. We don't need that crap. You are here to teach our students and, you know, see our patients and so on. They can hire other people from anywhere else. Well, all of that disappeared. You see, the departments need money. In fact, we have to earn part of our salary. That was unheard of many years ago. You know, it was funded by the federal government and state governments and other ways of funding it. That started to dry out and disappear. So to keep these things going, money had to come somewhere else. And so we get contracts from outside, and we send the faculty to work here, there, and in the other place, and we send the residents to do the same. In the past, that would have been unheard of. The residents were always at the university hospital, in the department of psychiatry. They didn't have to go anywhere to learn anything, you know, and that was much better education. Well, all of that came in, and this was an incredible source of money and prestige. In universities, the level in the ladder, in the academic ladder, goes up if you get a lot of money in research. It moves you from an instructor to a full professor in no time at all. You know, you see the amount of bias that gets involved into this now. What kind of research is that? Well, let me tell you. The pharmaceutical companies prepare the protocols. You are not a free researcher that organizes your research and decides what your goals are and how you're going to get to it. You get this given to you. And you have to follow strictly the protocols as they give it to you. And you have to sign a contract that you cannot use that except with their approval. That you cannot publish anything about your research except with their approval. And so it goes. all right? And if you fail to comply with this, you never see again a penny from any of these organizations. Never. You are outcasted for the rest of your life. A lot of people, unfortunately, is willing to play that game. Is it necessarily a bad game? No. Conceivably, the protocols that the pharmaceutical companies produce could be a good protocol, could be a good research protocol, could be a good control, research protocol with adequate controls and checks and balances and things like that. You can publish the results yourself. That's a privilege that the company reserves by itself. What gets published of your results is something that you don't decide, they decide. All right? Now imagine the kind of room that creates for dishonesty. And you will see where we go to and why we go to it very quickly. Well, all of these members of the faculty are the members of the psychiatric associations, the American Psychiatric Association that produced the DSM manuals. There is a vested interest in mixing apples and oranges. Why? Because there is a lot more money if you give apples and oranges medication, even if the oranges are needed, And the amounts of money are awesome, as you will see in a moment. So they write the manuals. They change. In fact, anything functional, as you know, have disappeared from DSM. They are not emotional disorders ever. We don't suffer from any emotional response. They are not functional disorders any longer. All the disorders require medication. You see the reason why? Pharmaceutical companies don't make money out of emotional disorders or functional disorders or neurotic disorders. They make money out of selling drugs, putting pills in everybody's mouth. So the expansion into the universities has a lot of consequences, including the fact that the manuals that run the profession and are used all over the world are corrupted and not necessarily, describe the reality of the situation, but are biased by the needs of the pharmaceutical companies. Now, how effective are the antidepressants? Well, the most effective form of treatment is ECT. It's never used nowadays, very rarely. In fact, you have to go to court, as I did, to make a patient well, in one occasion here at the university with this poor woman that otherwise would have killed herself and the baby. She wanted to kill the baby too, which some depressed people do. They are rarely used now. Why? That's not a pill. ECTs are not part of the business of pharmaceutical companies. They are not interested in ECTs. They have done the damn best in some occasions, in a number of different ways, to discredit it. Now, is that all that happened with the ECT? No. You see, unfortunately, psychiatry has no procedures. All other specialties have procedures. Procedures make money for doctors. You are a surgeon, you do an operation, you get a lot of money. You are an orthopedic surgeon, you put a cast in somebody, you make a lot of money. Psychiatrists don't have anything like that. ECT became a procedure. Now you have a procedure. And the procedure, when it was being used, as I recall it, it was about $20. But you could do 30 ECTs in a couple of hours. That's $600 in 2 hours. That was 40 years ago, 50 years ago. That was an enormous amount of money. And unfortunately, the non-scrupulous doctors gave ECT to anything that worked. And that gave it a bad name. That was a few, but you only need a few rotten apples to spoil the whole basket of apples. You know, that's unfortunately the case. So that was one reason. Frequently it was ignorance. They just did not know better. And because they have combined apple and oranges and reactive depression were included as major depressive disorder, they started to get ECTs too. Well, they don't do well with ECTs. ECTs got a bad name. Nowadays it's very difficult to really do ECTs. Let me tell you about the tricyclics, which was the first group of drugs. They help 2/3 of the patients. That is about 66% of the patients, 65%. That's what the pharmaceutical companies claim with the present medications, whether they are tricyclics or serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So, but on the other hand, it is clearly demonstrated that of that 66%, 1/3, which is 33%, is being helped as a placebo effect, which in actual practice reduce the effectiveness of antidepressant to about 30%. You following? Yeah? And that is about right, because it will be the endogenous depression that respond to whatever antidepressant you are using, some better than others and so on, but not the others. But you see, we doctors don't know the difference between a patient that gets better as a placebo effect from a patient that gets better because the medication is curing the endogenous depression. We don't know the difference. So most doctors say, this works beautifully, you know? And the pharmaceutical companies are not telling you that of that 66%, 1/3 is a placebo effect. They are not telling you that you have to get from somewhere else. They are not going to tell you that. The most they tell you is this works in 65% of the patients. They don't tell you that in reality it's only about 30% of the patients. All right? So, that's the consequences of DSM lumping together endogenous, the real McCoy, and reactive depression. See, endogenous depression don't respond to placebo. They don't respond to psychotherapy either. You wanted to do psychotherapy, well, then you were crazy. Because they don't respond to psychotherapy while they are in the depressive episode. Afterwards, psychotherapy may be very useful. And indeed, people have taken some of these patients into analysis and helped them tremendously in a variety of ways. Not with the depression. The depression will come on the 6th year. That was the cycle, you know what I mean? And indeed, when I was in Ann Arbor, there were a couple of people there that were in our side of the profession that have been in analysis forever and done very well. For every so many years, they got depressed. And they came to see me. In those days, you know who I sent them to? Barney Carroll. And Barney Carroll made them well, because he was handling antidepressants real well. He was good at that. He was very good at doing that. They were eternally grateful to me, because I said, you have a lot of neurotic problems and you have been helped tremendously by this, but this is never going to go away unless you treat it in a different manner. They got well very quickly, you know. Solve the problem. Now that explains well the claim of 2/3 responses, i.e. 1/3 of them are legitimate and 1/3 are placebo response in reality. They're not accounting for remaining 1/3 are probably a mixture of reactive, not responded to placebo, and severe endogenous depression that don't do well. Not all endogenous depression do well with medication. Some, as I told you, will require ECTs. Some pharmaceutical companies have encouraged this confusion in order to medicate everybody, whether it is an endogenous or reactive depression. Indeed, some doctors, psychiatrists, it's unbelievable, but it's true, have recommended that you take, whether you are depressed or not, that you take antidepressant because they think it will enhance the quality of your life, make you happier, which is an incredible absurdity. But it happens. It does happen. Obviously, behind that, there are certain subtle kind of influence on the doctors to make them believe that that may be true, you know. Now, as I told you, remember, doctors are unable to distinguish between a drug and a placebo effect, though they frequently feel these drugs work quite well. Hell, if they make better 2/3 of my patients, that's not too bad. But you are throwing money away at people that don't need that. And these drugs, as I said to you, have... Now, on the other hand, if well used in the right kind of patient, antidepressant medications may well be a good alternative to SCT in a very large number of cases. Let me tell you one of the disadvantages. We will discuss that a little more. When a depressed patient starts to get better at the present time using drugs, as soon as he starts to get better in inverted commas, what that means is that he's recovering his energy. He has more energy. These people loses their energy, okay? And but the feeling of depression is not gone. They still feel that life stinks and that the best thing you can do is to get out of this world. And now they have the energy. They have had a plan in their head to kill themselves. They just didn't have the energy to get it through, to activate it, you know? And that's what the medication, antidepressants do. They increase the energy. The patient is still feeling like a dog, but now he has the energy, so he goes and kills himself. In other words, with antidepressant drugs, when the patient starts to improve, he may be at the most risk he will be for a while. More risk than he was fully down in the bottom of the barrel. Now, in terms of children and teens, the facts are, these are the facts, that drugs, antidepressant drugs, have by and large not proven more effective than placebos. And even in adults, stretching it, they only prove better than placebos in only half of the studies. And these studies, remember, are biased. These protocols are not necessarily clean. They are biased, many of them. So this 50% is questionable. This was published in the New York Times recently after this, in fact, in September, a few days ago. The same evidence, though, is found in Clinical Evidence in Mental Health, that book that I distributed there or gave you to look at, which researches all the results of the control trials of research, you know, and all the publications, and that's the conclusion. They are not financed by anyone. They just tell the truth. And if you check the 2 or 3 other publications of a similar nature, you find the same result. So this is a fact. This is an incontrovertible fact. It's ignored olympically by child psychiatrists. Don't ask me why. When I talk about this to some of my residents, the culture is such that they think I'm a fossil. And I look at them and feel sorry for them because I know they are going to cost a few lives unnecessarily, you know. Now, the above has been the view of some psychiatry for a long time. This illness in children is a different kind of animal. It needs a kind of different approach. And now, pharmaceutical companies obviously have and still do heavily promote the use of antidepressants in younger children. They became ambitious. At the beginning, they were a little shy because in a court of law, a child that has been damaged by a drug can cost a lot of money. Well, the fear, they say familiarity brings contempt. That seems to be what happened. The fear seems to have disappeared, and it has influenced the field so that antidepressants are very commonly used in children by child psychiatrists nowadays as a very legitimate type of form of treatment. That obviously enormously widened the antidepressant market. Here are the figures. Nearly 11 million of prescriptions for antidepressants were given to children in the year 2002. In the first 6 months of 2003, that number grew by 8%. Yeah? That's another million. The estimated total market value of antidepressant prescriptions is $20 billion. Not millions, billions dollars. Nations go to war for that amount of money. That makes antidepressants one of the biggest selling drugs of all times. And you can understand that some unscrupulous people, organizations, occasional pharmaceutical companies will be corrupted by these figures of money. It's not every doctor, it's not every pharmaceutical company, it's not everybody. But you see the room for the corruption. In England, a drug called Serosat, which is known here as Paxil, that drug alone, produced by GlaxoSmithKline, reached nearly 3 billion British pounds. That's roughly about $7 billion. Just one product. That's a bestseller product. You read today in the market that Merck withdrew Vioxx from the market because they have found that it produces, Vioxx is a drug that sold about $3 billion. It will make an enormous hole on Merck. If you follow the market, you will see Merck going down the drain tomorrow like a brick thrown in a lake, But you see the amount of monies that are involved and why there are so many spurious pressure in our field. Now, the question of hiding research data, which is what has led to all of this, and by that meaning negative findings or dangerous findings, only publishing what they want. Remember, they control the protocols, they control what you can say, they control what gets published, they control the information that is passed to doctors. And regretfully, many doctors believe the pharmaceutical representative and companies don't use critical judgment. It's really remarkable. To me, it's astonishing. In the United States, in this country, in June of this year, the state of New York sued GlaxoSmithKline, Paxil, for suppressing research revealing the suicide risk for under 18s, which were available in the research protocols that they have, but they never told a doctor about it, they never told the public about it. That was hidden. The state received immediately as a settlement for $2.5 million and will have the information released by GlaxoSmithKline. No arguments. They pay immediately, that's it, they are going to publish the information. The need for transparency in research results is more than obvious, and until that happens, and some controls can be exercised over these different kind of activities in a rational manner that will ensure that the results will be available to physicians, that nothing will be hidden, that the good will be presented with the bad, that the negative results will be made available to everybody, including the public, is an enormous necessity that we have. Until that happens, the risk of terrible things happening are enormous. Let me move a little bit. We are nearly the end of this. Let me talk a little bit about the increased suicide rates, especially improved, and why is that the case. I already told you that that never happened in endogenous, in reactive depression. That's not a phenomenon of reactive depression. When they started to improve, they didn't have a higher risk of suicide. That's typical of the endogenous depression treated with medications. I never lost a patient to suicide. Once you gave this endogenous depression one ECT, the risk of suicide was completely gone. Partly because they got a little disorganized with the first ECT, and partly because for some reason it didn't happen. It never happened. It was the only contraindication to ECT was an acute myocardial infarction at that moment. Yeah, no one that you have 10 months ago, but an acute one at that moment. You were having a heart attack at that moment, or active TB, active tuberculosis, which was not uncommon, 40 years ago. These were contraindications because it spread it, Beyond that, there were essentially no complications. A little loss of memory for 2 or 3 weeks. It tended to disappear. People recovered beautifully, were perfectly well. Not 40% or 50% of partial recovery. No, everybody got perfectly well until the next episode. Very interesting. Don't ask me why that was, but that was the way it was. Let's talk about the role of cultural changes. 30, 40 years ago, you would have never heard of a child having committed suicide. It just didn't happen. It was a strange phenomenon. Very strange. A child below the age of 13 having killed himself. You heard that. You have heard me say this before. As I told you, we have a couple of lectures on suicide in children, adolescents, and adults in the web page, which are very interesting and have the data. But you will say, what? When? How? Why? How is that possible? It didn't happen. It was extraordinarily rare. Do you think it's rare today? No. No. Thousands of children attempt suicide today. Now you tell me, what is the difference? What happened? Why not then and now? Even in adolescence, which by then can develop endogenous depression and have any number of reactive depression, the girlfriend send them home or whatever it may be. They don't do well at school. They have an argument with their parents and say, oh yeah, well, I killed myself so you suffer, you will see, you son of a gun, you shouldn't treat me this way, and things of that kind, which are common. Let alone that adolescents, as you know, have the idea that they can do anything to their bodies and nothing is going to happen. In fact, most adolescents that kill themselves, attempt suicide and actually complete it, are victims of what I call in that paper on children and adolescent suicide of pharmacological roulette. They took Tylenol not knowing that if you take too many, it destroys your liver and you die. And if somebody doesn't come within a short period of time, you're gone. They don't know that. So it's like playing with a gun, you know what I mean? They obviously are expecting that somebody will come and find them. In fact, the people that have researched this says that 80% of the time these adolescents expect to be rescued by somebody. Unfortunately, sometimes the rescuer doesn't come home when they expect him to come home for whatever reason. They stay late at home and so on, they die. All right? That's very, very common. What explains it? Well, the culture has changed. talking about this and killing yourself is a common event. It's in the papers all the time. It's in television all the time. It's taught in the schools all the time. It's have become a weapon against the parents. You don't give me what I want, and I'm going to kill myself. It's common. Is that in all cases? No, but it's in a very large number of cases. There is a copycat phenomenon. Did you not read recently? A number of people in Columbia University, in New York, they have lost, I don't know how many people jumping from the particular floor, you know. It has become fashionable to do that among this group of people. And as you know, this gets widely published. It appears on television. It's just like violence. We are used to violence, you know. And so it's part of the culture now. You feel unhappy, well, you can kill yourself. Your parents don't buy you the bicycle that you want, you can threaten them with killing yourself. You can do all kinds of things. There are all kinds of factors that lead to suicide, which is not necessarily the result of depression as an illness. You understand what I'm trying to say? In fact, the large majority of children that kill themselves and adolescents that kill themselves, like 90% of them are in no medication whatsoever. Now the argument here is that these drugs lead to suicide. Well, that may well be true in some cases. It's questionable in my mind that that is true, quite frankly. What is certainly true is that 80 to 90% of the children and adolescents that commit suicide are not taking any drug. So apparently not taking any drugs is dangerous because it leads to suicide. And if you are not careful, somebody is going to produce that argument. Possibly pharmaceutical companies that give them drugs, you know, give them medications. All right. So there is the role of the media, TV, newspaper, radio, internet, and so on. There is an imitation, factor. There are as well the multiple reasons why people commit suicide, including children and adolescents. Not everyone is depressed. There are any number of reasons, as I told you. I'll show you how sorry you will be, some adolescents think. And that applies to the girlfriend. You know, I knew a family that one of the members of one of the brothers had a girlfriend that kind of mistreated him, he thought. And he went and called her. She came out to the window and he blew his head off in front of her. Had no other purpose than to punish her. You know, really he was not depressed. He was angry at her. All right? And that's not uncommon. I show you how you will miss me, how you will suffer, and so on. And they don't have frequently a full realization of the finality of the thing that they will do. So it's frequently done out of anger. In other cases, Hemingway is a good example of that. He had a psychotic depression. Running his family, in fact, he used the same shotgun to kill himself that his father has used to kill himself. There are cultural and religious factors. I don't need to go too much into this. Poor, miserable life conditions. Promise of a paradise after death. Think of the terrorists. They are not killing themselves because they are depressed. They are killing themselves for religious, political, and cultural reasons. And if you are a martyr, then you might go to heaven. This is, I believe, the last one. We have all different character structure, different personality structure, different abilities to deal with the vicissitudes of life, different ability to tolerate frustration and to accept substitutes or change. And most adolescents, as I told you, are errors in judgment. And I have to end by telling you that if endogenous depression, some of them will kill themselves no matter what. There is as well the unrealistic expectation of the powers of medication and the knowledge of doctors. We can avoid every one of those. The need to negate the family's role in that outcome. You know, we have to blame something, either the doctor or the medication, but not what I did or didn't do for this child, or my neglect, or whatever it was. The need to externalize blame when somebody dies. Nobody wants that. The role of the family history finally is extraordinarily important. If it is in the family, take it seriously. I told you that most children and adolescents were not taking antidepressants when they were calling themselves, and that there are any number of other things that lawyers and others invent to make money, quite frankly. Like, for example, anti-acne medications have been blamed some time ago for a lot of suicides, and there have been even some settlements of that type. I think we can stop that.